For a small homegrown kind of winery in BC to be able to sell even to another province in Canada is tremendously difficult. If you can't even trade within your own country, it makes it really hard to then think about going externally.
Hi, I'm Faisal Karmali. Welcome to Karmali Exchange. Business owners need to help each other out.
Keep on pushing to meet the needs of the customer will meet the needs of the business.
For the past 30 years, I've been pounding the table saying that Canadian businesses suck internationally. And we've got a well-known guest. Everybody's talking about her book, Mexicans Don't Drink Molson. It's so true. We've got Andrea Mandel-Campbell here. What an amazing book. Andrea, welcome to the Karmali Exchange.
Thank you. It is great to be here.
Okay, I think what I've been saying for the past 30 years about how Canadian businesses are terrible on the international market, your book and the title of it alone kind of explains a bit of it. Do you agree? Do we suck internationally, or is there some other thing that we should be thinking about?
I don't know if we suck internationally because we don't really try that often. I think that's part of the challenge, really, is I think we'd probably be pretty good at it if we just attempted it. And part of the challenge, of course, is that, it depends how you define international. The efforts that we do make tend to be focused on the United States, which, as we now know, is turning into a bit of a challenge. But we're not so great going beyond, let's say, our neighbors to the south.
Yeah, and I think you've nailed it there. I have an individual, like my neighbor's kid came up to me and said, "Can I mow your lawn? I'll come every week and take care of it for you." And I said, "Yeah, that's an interesting proposition." We talked about price. And I said, "Why'd you come to me?" And he said, "Well, it's quite easy. You're just my neighbor. I don't have to go anywhere." And I think Canadian business owners are very common in that thought process. It's so much easier in thought to just go down to the States because there's so much opportunity there that they miss out on, 99% of the rest of the world. Why do we tend to have that neighbor mentality versus looking at the rest of the world, which has so much more opportunity?
To be fair to Canadian business people, what I would say is, the benefit that we have had as Canadians, along with many things, is that we happen to be beside, as you point out, the richest country in the world. It's a massive market. Everybody wants in there. We speak the same language. Arguably, when you have a conversation with Americans, things may have changed a little bit, but we don't feel culturally so different. And so as a result, it only makes sense that we would go there first when you think about, the risk reward ratio. So I don't really blame Canadians, but when anybody thinks about a business and how you always want to manage risk and you want to distribute that risk. So if you put all or most of your eggs in one basket, any business plan, you look at that and you say there's risk involved there. But unfortunately, we're only kind of coming to that, terrible realization now.
Without giving too much away, because I want everybody to buy your book, why don't Mexicans drink Molson?
To state the obvious, this isn't a book about beer, but beer is kind of the metaphor that I'm using. And essentially, it's a variety of factors, one of which we've just talked about, which is when it's so much easier to stay close to home. But it's a combination of government policies that make it difficult for Canadians to necessarily think about taking the risk of going outside, that often keep us staying home. A lot of people, for example, don't know that the most lucrative beer market in the world is actually in Ontario because of what's called the beer store. That's how creative we are with marketing and branding. And because, the two beer companies at the time that had the oligopoly, which was Labatt's and Molson, because they owned it and really could keep a lot of other beer companies out, the cost for them to do business in Ontario just was so low compared to going to other places that they just made money almost without trying. And so when you create kind of competitive in markets that are not competitive, it's very hard to then compete in much more difficult places. So you create those kind of, you send the wrong signals to how you're going to do business. And at the same time, there's almost a psychological element to that, because if you know that's how you're winning, if you know that your success is based on that, I think you tell yourself, well, if I actually had to go into a really difficult and more challenging market, I wouldn't be successful. Like, it actually kind of there's a cost to that kind of, protective market in terms of willingness.
Was that a policy that brought in? Because you mentioned government policy, and I think you and I are aligned with that. When you say it's policy, kind of give us a bit more color around the policy itself so business owners can kind of go, aha, that's what's happening.
The interesting thing is a lot of countries have had these policy. It's about building nascent industry. And it's frankly what's behind the Trump tariffs today. This idea that you put a wall up and you keep others out and you force your own industry to kind of build up. But there is the unintended consequence of that. So in the case of Canada, we wanted to make sure that we had Canadian-owned beer companies. So we gave them the exclusive distribution license in Ontario. And it used to be across Canada like this. Of course, in Western Canada, it's opened up a bit more and you have more competition. But you could apply that to telecommunications in Canada. That's what the wheat board was really all about until it was finally dismantled. That's what a lot of our banking, if you look at the rules around foreign ownership, it's these kind of regulations that were initially meant to protect our nascent industry and help them grow, but have now kind of been embedded into the way we compete and do business in the country.
And if you bring it down to a more smaller sized business, what are the policies that are preventing them? Because when you talk about government programs or businesses like the Business Development in Canada or the BDC and so forth, they're all talking about how they can help you export, but they really focus on the U.S. when they're speaking to you. When you talk to them about the smaller businesses, not the big, large ones like the telcos or the major banks or the major beer companies, smaller companies, how did they start to think outside of the box of just go down south when they can go east-west?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. If you're talking about, when you talk about government policy that discourages competition, one of the great examples, of course, is in the liquor market and we're talking about that right now with interprovincial trade barriers, right? And the ability to be able to sell, like for a small homegrown kind of winery in BC, to be able to sell even to another province in Canada is tremendously difficult. And so if you can't even trade within your own country, it makes it really hard to then think about going externally in some ways, right? So it's kind of like this vicious circle that happens as a result of these kinds of policies. But what I would say, and this is how I think about it as a small business owner myself, is if you are going to think about expanding internationally, you have to really be incredibly targeted in terms of how you're thinking about that. There was a while where I actually worked with a lot of cannabis companies. If you remember back in the day, the big boom in cannabis companies. And it was, in some ways, it was really heartening because all of a sudden, all these companies were saying, we're going to be the world dominators. We're the first out of the gate. We've legalized and we're going to own the world. And of course, that's not the case because these companies came out and they blew their brains out immediately because they didn't have any financial rigor or discipline. And I mean, that's one thing Canadians often are very good at, but they really weren't thinking about targeting, where am I going to go in a sustainable way where I think I've got an in into that market because there's an anchor customer there that really aligns with what I'm doing, or I have a trusted partner that can take me into that market in a way that will really allow me in a very targeted way to make some important inroads.
Would you not say, Andrea, that's the one key thing when you look at some of the other countries around the world, they allow businesses to come into their country, they actually promote it, but they want a strategic or a trusted partner that's local. Would you suggest that being one of the key pieces is finding that trusted partner that in that local market that you want to go after? Because I think that's lacking with many. And if you look at, let's say, Yum Brands, for example, from the US, they had a strategic partner in China to kind of get their foothold. And now KFC is pretty much everywhere in China. If you look at what they're doing, you kind of get that kind of approach, don't you?
Yeah, I think it's critical. I mean, when I run an adventure travel company, and my whole thesis when I came in was, I'm not going to go into any country. And I've spent a lot of time traveling. I used to be a foreign correspondent for many years. I'm comfortable in a lot of countries. I speak certain languages. And, my strategy is I'm half in Canada, half international in terms of what I offer. But the international destinations were chosen based on either me having some kind of deep connection, personal connection, or a strategic partner who I knew and trusted, who could really bring me into that market and provide me with a value proposition and something distinctive that would make me different. Me going willy-nilly into a country and really not understanding what you're getting into, I think is, really a recipe for disaster.
So let's pretend you're a small business owner, for those ones that are watching and so forth. And when I say small, I'm saying they're not publicly traded. They're not an oligopoly. They're just building their business and they want to grow. They realize the conflict with the US. What are the first 3 steps they need to go? Because the world is your oyster, but the world is also overwhelming. When you could think about being all things to all countries, you really can't. So what's the first 3 steps that a business owner should look at when they want to expand or grow globally?
So, first it's look at your product. Okay, so what is your product? And if the idea is you're looking to export that product or sell that product in another market, the first thing you need to look at is, okay, of all my business lines, and assuming one has several different products, what is the one that I really see as having the most potential to scale and is the most profitable for me at this point in time? And then it's really thinking about what country or company is going to be able, at first, if you think about it from a strategic partner perspective, that, maybe there's a company that you can be partnering with that can help bring you into other markets, but they're doing a lot of that heavy lifting because they're there already, they've been there, and you can kind of be that sucker fish on the top of the shark that's kind of going into that market. And the other thing to think about is if there is like a company that you want, let's say it's a German company that would be a great customer for your product. It's really about identifying what's that kind of group of companies that you'd love to sell into, that you really see that potential for your product, and really targeting them. I would say especially if you're doing a B2B type of business, I think it's really thinking about that, and where not only you have, the market fit and there's the culture fit. And I think you have to think about both of those things, and how people are going to, in a different market, potentially consume your product differently, use your product differently, because you have to, there's the business side of it, but there's the cultural side of it. And I just find that that's something that if you're not used to that can often be the more frustrating of the experiences. And that's why, having somebody either who's on the ground who knows this market very well, or, dipping into one of the things I talk about in the book, and one of Canada's real strategic advantages is our multicultural population. I guarantee you that there is somebody who probably doesn't live far from you, who grew up in that country, went to school in that country, has experience in that country, who speaks that language, who can be an incredible bridge into that market.
I find a lot of people, when they run their business, kind of look at it as if they're investing in the stock market. Oh, well, we're hearing China's doing well, let's go there. Or we're hearing India's booming now, let's go there. Yeah. And they're not really doing that strategic analysis on where does the fit happens. And culture is one, values is a big one as well. There also has to be an idea to actually do a proper business plan in that area. How does a business owner, when they look at these areas, these different countries, different cultures, similar values though, how do they do a business analysis to see, is it actually worth the risk or not worth the risk?
Well, I think you have to look at, some of the table stakes kind of questions, like rule of law. I think that's, super important. Intellectual property. These are key things to bear in mind, because, I lived for a long time in Mexico, and it's technically there's rule of law, but at the same time, it's a bit of a Russian roulette. So you have to be prepared from just those kinds of questions, and even knowing what you don't know, and to at least ask those questions. So I think it's really incumbent on any company to be first looking at, I think, those table stakes kinds of questions. And I also think, you've got to look for what your mode is and what your differentiator is. And you do that here in Canada, and you're going to have to do that in any country you go into. I'm very much of a counterintuitive person. So I find that when everybody's going here that's usually a good indicator to go somewhere else, because that's where you find that kind of blue ocean opportunity, those green fields where there's less competition from, let's say, other foreign companies, but you have an opportunity to really stand out. So maybe it's a smaller market. You don't, as a Canadian company, we're a big country and a small country at the same time. So going into China, it's like, a drop in the ocean. If you can find a smaller market, a simpler market, a market with clearer signals, but where you have the opportunity to perhaps stand out a little, then I think that might be quite interesting, especially if the market will bear, a really good margin for you.
And Andrea, there's a lot of politicians, members of parliament that watch this show. They gather the sentiment, some ideas, and some concepts to bring to the political arena. To the members of parliament who are watching this session today, what advice or what tips would you give them to open up policy to have more of the outcome that you're looking for than what we have today?
Well, I think it's starting with having more of a business-friendly mindset. I worked in politics, actually. I ran politically, and I actually was up in Ottawa. I spent a couple of years up in Ottawa working for a federal minister. So I wanted to see how the sausage was made. And there are a lot of massive structural barriers to fixing the system. I know a lot of people are very frustrated right now, and they're saying, let's get rid of a lot of this red tape. Let's kind of break down these interprovincial barriers. And it requires a certain amount of political courage because I know how politicians think in terms of, they're always looking at their constituents, which they should. But sometimes you have to just do the bold thing and, get out there and do what's right for everyone instead of just all, small vested interests. So it's really about thinking bigger picture. And it really is about, I would say what Canada has a dearth of is business people who have gone into politics. I understand why they don't do it. There's not a lot of benefit that you get out of it necessarily. But what I would encourage politicians to really do is kind of put themselves in the seat of the business person, because at the end of the day, they are the foundation of Canada's prosperity. It is not government. It is business people's money and taxpayers' money. And so there has to be this commitment to making it in a responsible way, as supportive as possible for people to build these businesses and create prosperity for Canadians. So it's about, I think, really working collaboratively with the bureaucracy and saying we need to think differently about how we are setting our companies up for success. And it means not necessarily doing the things the way we've always done them, because that's how we've always done them. Let's think differently.
Andrea, I've never met a business owner saying, nope, I'm done. There's no more need to grow. I've never met a business person come to me and say, I don't want to be in international markets. But they all say to me that it's very difficult because of public policy, because of the politics that get involved. How do business owners influence government to push this in the right direction?
Well, the thing is that you don't really, I don't know if you've noticed this, but you don't really see business leaders that often coming out and saying anything, right? They just kind of
quiet here. Like you look at the Americans, all these business owners are opening up their mouth and they're all over the place. But in Canada, we're very quiet here.
We're very quiet. So don't be surprised when, you're not heard. If you aren't kind of pushing for the things you want. And part of the problem in Canada is there's quite a divide between business and government. They don't really mix. And that's why oftentimes, people who go into politics who don't have business background then really don't understand the business world and what's required. And they work in a bubble. And, for a long time in Canada, it was almost like they didn't want to infect themselves with business because they wanted to say pure in some way, which
like it's a disease or something.
It's a disease or something. And so there needs to be, we always talk about how there needs to be better connection between business and politics. And it's a little better, but it needs to be a lot better. And that just, a lot of business people are guilty, frankly, of the fact that I'm just going to ignore politics and go about my business because I'm just going to do this and I don't need them, and I'm just going to work my way around them. And what they, because they're busy with their business and they've already got enough on their plate to start getting involved in politics. But the fact of the matter is, if you want things to change, you do have to get involved and you do have to, be public and write letters and meet with your local MP. And you have to do those things that, be part of a business association that makes public statements, that pushes for things and takes bold stands, because politicians aren't going to move. They are basically reflectors of the public signal. So if they aren't being told in public what needs to change, they're not just going to do it just because.
Andrea, are you more optimistic or pessimistic now with Canadian business in light of everything that's going on with our friends down south, all this international trade war, quote unquote? Are you more optimistic or pessimistic about Canadian business?
To start off, I'm a born optimist. It's just, I wouldn't be a business owner if I wasn't an optimist. I don't think I would have written the book unless I was an optimist, because I am such a proud Canadian, and I see so much potential in this country. And I do believe we have, as I say in the book, all the ingredients. We have so much going for us. We have such, a well-educated population. We've got a great multicultural community and Canadians. We are reasonable. We are civilized. We've got a pretty great piece of real estate. And, one of the benefits up until a little while ago was the fact that we are so, beside the United States, to be determined where that goes. But I still see so much potential. As the saying goes, never waste a crisis. So I actually think this is an interesting time, because it feels like, when you have a garage where you throw all the junk and you just let the junk pile up and you're like, I've got to get to that. But you never do, because you're just too busy with your day to day. And then all of a sudden something happens, you need your garage and oh my God, it's full of junk. So now we have to clean the garage. And I think if we clean it out and kind of start fresh, there is some great opportunities for Canadians if they, we have a clean garage, we have a view of the world, and we put all of our comparative and competitive strengths to use in a really effective way.
I definitely agree that we need to clean out the garage. We also need to be more proactive in our influence towards government. I think there's a huge opportunity in this country, and the business owners here. I kind of tell people that Canada's kind of like that cousin that just stays quiet in the family picnic. They're just hanging out there, and then until it's time to come, that individual will have to jump out, go out there and make their own name in the family. And this is the opportunity for Canada. Sometimes we have to need that pressure. And here we are. We've got that pressure on us from an international perspective. Andrea, like I said, I want everybody to read your book. How do they get a copy of it?
Well, go on Amazon and you should be able to find copies out there still. I mean, it is 15 years old, but I will tell you that, how history repeats or rhymes. It's amazing to me how the things that I wrote about when that book was published, how real they've become in a relatively short period of time. I wrote that book after spending 10 years abroad, coming back to Canada, and China had just joined the WTO, and I came back and thought, my gosh, this country is asleep. Do they not realize what's going to happen with China joining the WTO? We can't assume that we can rely on the U.S. anymore. And that was the reason why, as a kind of wake-up call, and here we are. It's a little different wake-up call, but a wake-up call all the same.
It's a wake-up call for all of us. Andrea, thank you for joining us on the Karmali Exchange.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for watching the Karmali Exchange. Make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. You can also follow me on social media at Faisal Karmali, where we can continue the business conversation.